All right, you'll notice we're going to start on page 29. The chapter's words, and you'll see a photo up on top with Bobby, Tommy, Leanie, Jimmy, and me. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's what everyone said, but was it true? Words were tricky. They seemed to have a secret life of their own. Mom wrote the word here and showed me the word ear that was hidden within it. That was cool. Sometimes a word had its own disguise, with the sound that you couldn't tell which one it was. You could hear the word see, but it might really be C, or even the letter C. The same with bear and bear, red and red. I was fascinated by swears too, curse words. You could have a perfectly respectable word like ship, but change one letter at the end and you might get your mouth washed out with soap. One day, Freddie Black, a kid who lived down the street, came to my house and taught me the worst swear you could ever possibly say. He said it to me just as my father came out of the garage, grunting under the weight of the storm window he was carrying on his back. Dad hadn't heard, but the swear hung in the air like a bad smell. I felt guilty learning a nasty word like that when my father was working so hard. "Can I help?" I asked Dad later that afternoon. He was outside the garage dusting off the screen windows. "Sure thing," he said, handing me a whisk broom. The day had grown cold and windy. The dirt I brushed off got blown back into my face. "Hey, Dad," I asked, "if you say Jesus, is that a swear?" "Well, it depends on how you say it," he replied. "If you just say the name Jesus, it's okay. But if you take the Lord's name in vain, that's a swear and it's wrong." The trees sighed in the breeze. I had always wondered exactly what that meant, take the Lord's name in vain. The wind blew again, a gush strong enough to twist the screen out of my hands. "Jesus!" I yelled. With that, Dad grabbed my arm angrily, swatting my bottom, and sent me into the house. My bottom hurt, but my feelings hurt even worse. Maybe words couldn't hurt you, but they sure could get you into trouble. All right, we're going to go ahead and start on page 33. The chapter is Jimmy, and you'll see another photograph up on top, and this is Mom holding Jimmy at Christmas. When Jimmy and I were in our bunk beds, we talked about everything. Most of the time, I knew what he was thinking, and he knew my thoughts too. One time, Jimmy led a bunch of kids through a part of Ailes Woods we've never explored before. It was hot and the rest of us wore shorts, but Jimmy's always wore heavy jeans because he liked to climb through thickets of briars and prickers. His face was sweaty and streaked with dirt. We just entered a sunny meadow, running full speed, when Jimmy suddenly slammed on the brakes. He pointed at a wooden shack caved in on one side. "Come on," he yelled. Jimmy climbed in. I heard a muffled cry, and then he climbed out again. Everyone gasped. He was triumphantly holding 2 fistfuls of snakes. There must have been 6 of them in each hand, gardener snakes twisting in the sunlight, furious that their sleeping place had been disturbed. Another time, after a bad windstorm, Jimmy and I went hiking through a swampy part of the woods. The storm had knocked over a tree, and a shallow pool had formed in the crater left by the mass of uprooted roots. We went in for a closer look, and as I moved to the water's edge, something lurched into the water. "Did you see that?" Jimmy asked. "Yeah," I nodded. "Looked like some kind of newt or salamander." "That was no ordinary salamander," Jimmy informed me. "Didn't you see the red on its gills?" At home, Jimmy searched through the World Book Encyclopedia to find the animal he'd seen. For a long time, he sat on the living room floor paging through volumes A, amphibians, L, lizards, and R, reptiles. "Found it," he said, showing me the page. "A mud puppy, that's it, we saw a mud puppy." Mud puppy. I fell in love with the odd name, the funny picture it made in my head. The name clicked. Pretty soon all the neighborhood kids were calling the uprooted tree Mud Puppy Place, although we never did see any mud puppies after that day in the woods. All right, we're on page 37. We're going to read School. And there's another photo, and Jimmy with a turtle he found in the woods. It was time for me to start first grade. Jimmy stood with me at the bus stop. Mom waited with us. "What are you going to do in school?" Jimmy asked, frowning. "I don't know," I said. "Learn stuff." "Why can't I come too?" "You're not old enough," I told him. "Next year," Mom said. Jimmy kicked a stone across the street. Finally, the bus rambled up, huge and yellow. It opened its doors. Jimmy stepped back as I climbed the stairs. I found a seat next to my friend, Steve Fishman, and waved through the window. Mom waved and flashed a big smile, but my brother kept both hands at his sides. I liked school, and on that first day I knew I'd be good at it. I could just tell. I was good at figuring out what the teacher wanted me to do and exactly how she wanted me to do it. Add, read, copy letters, though my handwriting was terrible. I even liked the hot dog, wax beans, and fried potatoes they served for lunch. The day flew by. That afternoon when I got off of the bus, Jimmy was at the bus stop, tapping his feet, eagerly waiting for me. Look! He had a small animal skull in his hands. What is it? I think it's a beaver, he said. Too big to be a cat. I found the bones in the woods. Here, it's for you. The next day, when I stepped off the bus, he gave me an old wasp nest. Every day, as soon as I got off the bus, he handed me a treasure he'd found in the woods. I knew Jimmy would be going to school soon, and I was worried about him. I tried to get him ready for it. It's not like home, I said. You've got to follow the rules, or you'll get into trouble. What rules? Like you can't just talk whenever you want, I explained. You raise your hand if you want to say something, okay? Okay. Eyes closed, he raised his hand and pointed straight up. This is serious, I told him. Do you know the Pledge of Allegiance? The what? He asked. I made him stand with me in the kitchen, put his hand on his heart, and pledge allegiance to an imaginary flag on the wall. Jimmy groaned and rolled his eyes. They say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, so you've got to know it, and you've got to know it by heart, I said, jabbing him lightly in the chest. You better learn it now. The following September, the big day came. Jimmy held my hand and giggled nervously when the bus arrived. We ran up the stairs together, and Jimmy sat on the edge of his seat all the way to school. When we got there, a woman met us and pinned a paper circle to his shirt. My brother shot me one last look before the lady led him away. That day I spotted Jimmy only once, walking in a line with the other kids headed into the cafeteria. In the woods, he always knew exactly where he was. But standing in that noisy cafeteria, with his freckles and thick glasses and cowlicky hair, Jimmy looked lost. When Jimmy got off the bus that afternoon, he went straight into the woods. I didn't see him again until supper time. That night I asked Jimmy if he liked school. Boring. He didn't want to talk about it. And that's the way it was for him every day. He'd come home and go straight to the woods. He didn't even wait to change out of his school clothes or even eat a snack. School was fine for a kid like me because I knew how to shut up and listen. But it seemed wrong to take an outside kid like Jimmy and lock him inside for 6 hours a day. They should have a different kind of school for Jimmy, maybe a place with acres of unexplored woods and streams and swamps and steep rocky cliffs where he could spend hours making forts or digging for fossils and animal bones. In November, we got our report cards. I sneaked a peek at Jimmy's. His grades were lower than mine, a lot lower, which didn't make any sense. I knew that Jimmy was smarter than me, but on that report card, there was no grade for knowing where snakes sleep in the heat of the day, for being able to tell the difference between the skull of a cat or a beaver, a salamander or a mud puppy. It wasn't fair, I told myself, that the woods would always be the place where Jimmy learned best. In that school, he would always be a straight A student. All right, we have one more chapter. We're going to read First Pen on page 43, and there's a photo of Little Ralph and Big Ralph. When I was 8, Dad bought me a pen. It was a cheap Bic, the kind with a clear barrel so you could see how much ink was left in the cartridge. Still, I loved it. In school, we wrote in pencil, so putting inked words onto a piece of paper really made me feel grown up. With that penned in a brand new notebook, I made my first story. I wrote it on a rainy Sunday, sitting at the kitchen table while Mom made caramel apples with the little kids. The story was about a Major League Baseball player who batted .000 during his rookie year. The player was amazing. He got a hit every time he came to bat. No pitcher could figure out how to strike him out. It was fun writing that story, and it felt like a small miracle, too. First, there was nothing on the page. Then the story appeared, written in ink that couldn't be erased. I sat for a long time wondering what to write next. I stared at my Bic, the cartridge filled with blue, so dark it was almost black. What words were hidden, unborn, unwritten, in all of that unused ink? All right, at this time, you're going to go ahead and grab the questions that we talked about before you were doing some reading, and you're going to answer those questions. Please feel free to go back to any of the audio if you need it. Go back into your text to help you answer those questions.